So gut feelings, butterflies in your stomach on your first date, for example, that's a simple one. It starts in the brain, it goes down, it affects your gut contractions, it probably affects your microbes, it feeds back to the brain through the vagus nerve.
I would love to start with literally going from top to bottom and detailing what are some of the nuts and bolts ways that the brain is literally connected to the gut. How does that interaction really work?
The fact that it does work has a lot to do with evolution, because in evolution we started out with, organisms started out with a floating digestive tube with some nerves wrapped around that tube. So that was our first nervous system. And it took care of both contractions of the gut, regulation of the gut, but also, fight and flight response and digestion. So everything was in this one very primitive nervous system. Then as animals evolved and developed a polar brain, that then started to take care of the things around us, not just digestion. There was a division of labor. Some stuff stayed in the gut. It became the so-called enteric nervous system, or little brain of the gut, or it's also called the second brain, even though it was the first brain, and our central nervous system that took care of everything else. And obviously, even though there was a division of labor, they stayed very closely connected, these two systems. So it's almost like you can say these are not separate separate entities. It's part of the same theme of regulation of complex functions. And so now when does the brain have to sort of talk to the gut? Anything that happens in the gut, the contractions, the digestions, the secretion of fluids, the absorption, is actually taken care of by our ancient system, the enteric nervous system. As long as things go normal. If something get out of balance with the whole person, the organism, then the brain kicks in and tells the little brain in the gut, you need to change that. So that happens under stress, during different emotions. So, we can almost say that every emotion that we perceive consciously, or even those that go on without our conscious awareness, they have a mirror image in the gut, because the brain sends that information to the gut and adjusts the gut's function to that emotion. So if you're, if you're angry, essentially the brain creates a different baseline in your gut, not a good one for your digestion. Same with when you're anxious. If you're in a fight and flight situation, very severe stress, then what's good for the body overall is that you empty the gut, so no calories are needed to run digestion, and all the energy goes to your skeletal muscle to run away or to fight. So you want to, sounds kind of gross, but you want to empty the upper part through vomiting, or nausea and vomiting. You want to empty the lower part through diarrhea. So that's a classical.
What if both are happening at the same time?
Yeah, that does happen. I have patients. So if that fight and flight response is triggered inappropriately, because very few people have to run away from a tiger, even though it does happen, like the recent story from India where this tiger ate 9 people.
No big deal. Oh my gosh.
But so this fight and flight response is still triggered inappropriately. If you have a lower threshold, so this whole stress responsiveness, which is highly variable between people, then these signals from the brain to the gut, have that effect. Now, we talked a lot about the top down. There's also the bottom up.
Right.
So this came up, when I started my training and research decades ago. It was found that so there was a lot of interest in the vagus nerve, the function of the vagus nerve, mainly because the vagus nerve played a big role in peptic ulcer disease. And surgeons found out if you cut the vagus nerve, then, that's a dramatic but effective treatment for recurrent chronic peptic ulcer disease. I mean, obviously, we no longer, thank God, we no longer do this today, but a lot of research went into the vagus, and it became clear 90% of the fibers of this nerve that innervates every cell in your gut goes to the brain, from the gut to the brain, 90%. Only 10% mediate these signals we talked about earlier, the fight and flight response or the emotions. So the question that was not answered at the time is, why do we need 90% of this capacity send signals to the brain? So today we know there's a lot of stuff happening in the brain that in the gut that the brain needs to know. For example, with a simple thing, if we have eaten a meal and we feel full and satiated, that's a signal generated by cells in the gut and transmitted via the vagus nerve to the brain. But now we have the microbes. We have 40 trillion microbes, and they produce all kinds of things and interact with virtually all the cells in the gut, including these satiety hormone containing cells. And so now we have an explanation why we need such a complex communication system bottom up from the gut to the brain. And we're still trying to figure out, what goes on in these pathways. Because I would say in terms of the microbiome signaling to the brain, we're still in its infancy. There's millions of genes that express certain things. Only a few of those we know what they are, what molecules they are, and we know even less of what they do. But so brain-gut communication, summarize that, is a circular system. The brain always talks to the gut, and the gut always talks to the brain. And it's a circular communication that, so I don't call it a brain-gut axis, but really a brain-gut system, where we have to apply systems biology, network science to understand it. It's not a simple linear thing. You have this one nutrient entering the gut and then something happens. It's always like in that circular motion, and that's why it's been difficult to come up with medications or interference with that. I mean, you can imagine, figure out what 40 trillion microbes have to tell the brain, and now you figure out what's wrong in a disease, complex disease like depression or Alzheimer's or autism spectrum.
Like we got a magic bullet.
Yeah, and that's probably not a magic bullet. It's probably you have to have a combination of things.
Right, magic bullet that's idiocy to think that you could have that.
The magic bullet approach, that worked for the peptic ulcer, but that was one of the few things.
But even with that's exactly the thing I was going to mention. There's a reason that occurrence was happening, right? And this is something you just turned on a light bulb in my mind. Like I never thought about this. By cutting that nerve, which you said is a very effective means for treating that condition. The question is why? If the brain is in this connection between the brain and the gut, obviously stress and or other emotional components, stuff going on, was contributing to this outcome in the gut. And so basically you're just cutting off that stress signal in a sense. Is that correct?
Yeah, and there's another example from the peptic ulcer. H. pylori was discovered.
Right, yeah.
And then people said, so we no longer need to. There was a lot of research going on at the time. It was early on in my career where we were interested in the effect of stress in peptic ulcer, in the start and in the flare-up. But the minute H. pylori was detected or identified, and then it could be eradicated with an antibiotic, that entire interest in any other factors stopped. And it's very interesting because there's lots of studies. So stress still plays a big role. And I'm surprised, it's because, H. pylori is a big moneymaker. Industry is not interested in pursuing this in any way further. But people that had H. pylori, the majority of whom, this was one of the most common infections. Most humans, and certainly our ancestors all had H. pylori, and it has, it had benefits for us. This was a synergistic relationship. And so early studies showed that the majority of patients with H. pylori do not develop an ulcer, and the factor that determines that high-risk population are the ones with the stress. So stress needed the precondition of the ulcer, of the microorganism to create the ulcer, and but obviously nobody would go into therapy or cognitive behavioral therapy for an ulcer treatment. It's just and what we've ended up with, this is the side effect of this this limited approach, or this linear approach. So we eradicated H. pylori. There's some people, even the people that were pioneers in that research field, are now, saying this was not a good idea, because the interaction with H. pylori trained our immune system early on, and getting rid of this training is one of the reasons why we have an increased rate of allergic disorders and autoimmune disorders.
Yeah, skyrocketing.
Skyrocketed, and it's surprising to me nobody brings that up with H. pylori. We're still happy. The medical system totally happy with that approach, and now in the US, for example, it's almost completely eradicated, and we have one of the highest rates of these autoimmune diseases. And there's obviously other factors, like we also throw antibiotics for other reasons at young children, doing the same thing.
Even for viral conditions.
Yeah,
it's
for
not
the viral.
Uncommon.
So we've essentially taken away that whole, you could say, like the university or the training system for our immune system by killing all these microorganisms early on in life. Yeah. There's no opportunity to differentiate between something harmful and non-harmful.
Yeah, this goes back to that network theme that you were talking about earlier. When I said the term, for example, magic bullet, it's seeing the effectiveness of, let's go ahead and destroy H. pylori without understanding how it's affecting the entire network.
Yeah, exactly.
Or going in and snipping that vagus nerve and getting this one result, not understanding how it's influencing the whole network. And when you mentioned millions of genes, you're referring to our bacterial genes, right? So we've got, trillions of bacteria, and they have genes too. So
this is what I meant. So we humans have 20,000 genes, which is almost nothing compared to the microbial gene pool, which is in the millions. So
most of our genes are not human.
Yeah. Yeah. So there used to be in the beginning of this field, people always emphasize we have 10 times more microbial cells than human cells. I mean, that is no longer true. It's about the same number. But in terms of the comparison at the gene level, it's even more extreme, 100 times, several hundred times more genes than, microbial genes than human genes.
Yeah. It's so fascinating. And all of this is interacting because we're talking about epigenetics and how those conditions for our bacteria are influencing what our human genes are doing.
Yeah, so there's, this is the topic that I mentioned to you. So I recently, I've had a long dialogue with this colleague of mine, Steve Cole, professor at UCLA, genius, and he has created this field of social genomics. And in a nutshell, this is different from epigenetics. Epigenetics means you change the gene expression profile of, permanently or for a long time. Something happens early in life, and then that gene functions different than if that had not happened, with a configuration that stays. Now, what Steve has shown is that conditions at different network levels. So, he looks at social networks, our social interactions. He looks at networks of human cells, then networks of genes, networks of microbes. So you have to imagine these are like levels, different levels. But what he has shown that there's this integrative interaction of all these networks. Mm-hmm. So it's complex at each level, each but then this interacts all the way down to the microbes. So something happens in your social network, such as Nia studied is social isolation, even the sense of happiness. There's this eudaimonic happiness when you do something for others or do something with a higher purpose, as opposed to your own satisfaction of your, materialistic wishes. That has a different effect, top down, on this, on your gene network. That creates a gene network that is beneficial for your body, for your function. So health is determined by what trickles down from the top to the bottom, and subtle things like this. So many people, particularly in the U.S., happiness is material things. They've done studies to compare that happiness with the eudaimonic happiness, and the material, the satisfaction of material needs and wishes has no positive effect on your gene expression pattern, whereas the eudaimonic one has a very strong effect. They've also shown that, for example, meditation and mindfulness and compassion, in very sophisticated studies, that all these have an effect on these gene networks, which then affect health outcomes. So it's a fascinating science where you can measure. People have always sort of said that, if you do good things for others, it's good for your health. But that you can actually measure this now at the genomic level is amazing, at the molecular level.
Yeah, it's very exciting. And this is the thing that I love about being alive today. We have scientific method to affirm certain things that we know, we experientially know to be true, but we're able to affirm that with science, and then that starts to bake itself into healthcare. Eventually, it takes a long time, for healthcare to change and integrate some of these new findings. But this is a great transition into longevity in that equation. If we're looking at the places around the world where people are living the longest, but not just their lifespan, but their health span. Mm-hmm. And we see, obviously, there's a variety of different diets. There are principles, of course, tenets of real food, movement patterns, but those things are not in a silo. The overarching thing that just tends to stand out in the research is the social interactions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, talking about networks, so you could almost say lifestyle networks, healthy lifestyle networks. It's not the one thing. So, and again, in science, we focus on one thing. We focus on diet. Do a huge epidemiological study. If people that are on a Mediterranean diet, do they live 5 years longer than those that are the standard American diet? That's kind of interesting, but it does not really relate to reality, because in places like in these blue zones and Sardinia, this interaction of their genes with their lifestyle, with their mindsets, in which way are they happy? Are they these eudaimonic, happiness principles, or and all these interact and probably contribute, I would say, relatively small individual percentages. I don't think, as we now, with all the chatter on the internet and then the commercial interests that jump on it, that you have this supplement, and this supplement gives you five more years of healthy living. It's absolutely ridiculous. It's really and there are these examples I mentioned to you, before. Sort of been intrigued by, if you look at obituaries, and you don't do this when you're younger, but at a certain age, it's kind of interesting that a lot of people that were familiar names when you grew up, musicians, artists, so all of a sudden they pass away. And what I've noticed, that a lot of people pass away at fairly high ages, 96, even 100, and for some people, it's probably not a coincidence, But I doubt that the majority, like you never read this, that I doubt that the majority of these people practice the kind of lifestyle that we promote today, with the exercise, the daily exercise, and the meditation,
the alcohol. Yeah.
Most of them have never done that. They may even be overweight. So you really question. I mean, what is it that ultimately? So you could be. Person says it's all in the genes. There's some people saying that Sardinia, this is a different gene pool, and they've always lived into old age, and it doesn't really matter what they do. I mean, I once, my young days, backpacked through Ecuador, and we went to a place that was written up in the National Geographic as this place with the oldest people in the world. This was long before the Blue Zone concept. And so a friend of mine and myself, we went there and we visited these people that lived in a very simple village. And then we spent a week with them and saw how they, how they lived. And they worked hard. They demonstrated to us. They still brought in firewood, even though they were 98 years old. Very simple life, and it sort of made sense, yeah. So with this clear water, But then what happened? Like 20 years later, I read up about this village again, and there's no more longevity. So a lot of hotels have moved in, and it's been completely westernized and modernized, and the modern lifestyle has moved in, and these old people have finally passed away. And the longevity has gone way down. It's become the average. So it wasn't the location, it wasn't the water, it was the overall, complex lifestyle that these people had.
Right. This is one of the things that we tend to do. We have our cognitive biases, especially when something starts to work for us, and we start to kind of put all of our eggs in one basket. And the truth is, it's a complex thing. There are certain inputs that our genes require, like they, expect from us. And if any of those things are missing, what we tend to do is we get really good at one thing, for example, like we're really about our exercise. But if you're not minding your sleep quality, for example, the system is going to break somewhere because it's an input that's expected. And so having that complex, as you mentioned, but most importantly, I think because our culture is the way that it is today, particularly here in America, where we're missing this social component, where, again, it is arguably the biggest driver, one of the biggest drivers of our health outcomes. And now we're so separate. We evolved in tribes. We evolved in community, and it went from, that to, neighborhoods. But even then, neighborhoods would work together. Everybody would know it. Now it's just like, you don't know anybody. As a matter of fact, don't talk to me. If your neighbor, comes walking by, it's a sketchy situation today. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's very strange.
So and also even with our own core family, our families tend to get separated as well. We don't have the dynamic and the different generations working together. And, these are things kind of, even just seeing the last couple of years, we've seen in some cases a resurgence of the family interconnectedness and another value placement on those relationships. So I'm hoping that's a leverage point to get people back connected with friends and family in a whole new way, in an intentional way.
Yeah, I mean, this is it's also came up in these conversations with Steve Cole, is that evolution obviously always has come up with solutions tested over millions of years about their effectiveness for survival of the species. And so the two things that influence our gene expression patterns in a positive way, one is social interactions, and the other one is this doing something for the good of others. And if you look at the two human areas where that is happening, so we take care of our children, we put in all the energy. So this is one of those activities clearly that has been selected and reinforced by evolution, and it I'm not sure if there are studies on that, but I'm certain that's one of the triggers for a gene expression pattern that's health promoting,
Yes.
taking care of somebody else, not yourself. And the other one is, living in social communities. And the social community part, I think, is under threat. It's hard to say that at the moment, what the outcome will be. I mean, you have this, you have the metaverse on the one side,
Right.
which is, I just recently read this article by a New York Times reporter who spent, I think, 48 hours in the metaverse and describes the insanity in that space. And, a young guy basically ran in the metaverse saying he spent the last 10 hours lying in bed and visiting people. And so the question is, can we fool evolution? And does our brain think that's a social connectedness? Or is that a complete breakdown of the social connectedness that we are programmed for,
You already know, Dr. Mayer, But, again, here's the thing. We can't stop what's already unfolding with technology and with that kind of integration pattern. But what we can do is fortify the education on how important it is to not live in the metaverse and the degradation, because evolution takes time. And that input, we do have sprinklings of data about, gaming and things like that. And we see beneficial components with this, hand-eye coordination, with, helping to modulate stress if you're happy gaming.
Yeah.
Right? I just saw a study recently on that. It's your disposition when doing the thing, coming into it, your mindset. And if we don't have a healthy association with how to manage our own minds and also healthy social connection, because what tends to happen, even if you're gaming, you're getting pissed off with somebody you don't know.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
On the other side of who knows where. And it's missing a vital dynamic in a relationship context that we evolve having. Being able to pay attention to nonverbal cues and being able to see facial expressions and to mirror, because there was actually a really great study out of Princeton, and they found that two people getting together and just building some rapport, that our brains start to sync up. Our brain patterns just kind of start to mirror each other. And we talk about that even in the realm of psychology of mirroring in order to create rapport. We naturally do that, and so pulling these pieces out, of course, there's going to be huge gaps in functioning, and doing it so quickly is what's scary.
Yeah, the speed is one of the main things. So, sort of quickly reflecting back on the microbiome. So the microbes have these, hundreds of millions of genes. That's their biggest strength, and they can adapt because of that much faster to changes in the environment. So you can change your diet tomorrow, go from a vegetarian to a standard American diet, and your microbiome will change within 48 hours. So it was this pivotal study on that. Now, our human genes cannot. So now all of a sudden, these microbes are processing this new type of food, generate metabolites that our immune system and our nervous system has not seen before. And it will take, probably 10,000 years before our genes really change. They can be modified, what they express, but not the genes themselves. So you get this mismatch. And I personally think a big problem is technology and lifestyle changes have moved so fast that our genetic machinery has not been able to adapt to that, in a way that it's beneficial for us. So you have these mismatches, and the mismatch is essentially rings the alarm bell for your immune system. Something is wrong. It doesn't, and it's very not a coincidence that we have this inappropriate activation of our immune system underlying now most of the chronic diseases of the last 75 years. It's an epidemic, and I think it has a lot to do, it's still, you have to prove it scientifically, and it has a lot to do with the different time scales that our systems can adapt microbes very fast, but then generating something that the rest of the body is not familiar with and doesn't feel comfortable with. The immune system also can adapt quickly, but not fast enough to recognize that it doesn't need to ring the alarm bells. It's not, we're not threatened if our microbes, if you switch from one food type to another, that it's something really dangerous. But so you can see in our conversation, we switch on these different levels of these networks that I talked about earlier. We go from the social to the, to the health, the body, the genes, the microbes. And I think a lot of the explanations of what goes on with us as humans, it's a good way to do this in this way. Not stay at one level, but see the connections and characterize the system's properties. It's kind of a whole new way of looking at medicine, systems medicine. What are these, how are these systems coordinated, and what have we done to throw them out of balance?
Yeah. It's a very sobering point to think about, because of course we see the surface thing, which is we're eating a high percentage of ultra processed foods in our diet today. According to the BMJ, right around 60% of the average American's diet is ultra processed foods. So the surface thing is like, okay, we're creating hormonal dysfunction, we're making our tissues out of really questionable materials. What we're not talking about, and this is that sobering point, is that we're literally altering our microbiome. We're changing the soil in which our health is kind of springing from. Mm. And that in and of itself is so remarkable. But the good news is it's as far as anything else in our sphere of health, it's the quickest thing we can alter in a positive direction as well. Now, my question would be, if you think about the breakdown products of the processed food, right? So like the, endotoxemia potential here with the interaction, because it's not just what we're feeding our human cells, but what we're feeding our microbes and the byproducts. Could those things also be making us sick?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly this category of, so when the microbes have different sources for what they produce. So, a big one is the food, obviously, and whatever is in the food, the chemicals, and there's another one that comes from our body, like hormones are secreted into the gut, and then the microbes process them and modify them, and many of them are being reabsorbed, like estrogen or testosterone goes through this circular motion. First it works in the body, then it's excreted in the bile. It goes to the microbes change it. A lot of it is excreted in our stool, but a significant portion is reabsorbed and goes back into our system. That's the second source. And then there's another source which are chemicals that our microbes have never seen in evolution, and a huge amount of stuff, from plastic particles to what's in the air, what's in the water, and those, I don't think we fully understand what secondary products are generated from the metabolism, what the microbes do.
Because don't our bacteria make waste as well, right?
Yeah. So I mean, a good example is this whole glyphosate story. That we don't have the enzymatic machinery to convert this into an absorbable form, but the microbes do. And so all the studies on the health effects on glyphosate were done on cell cultures, isolated cells. So those negative effects have never really been studied. And I think the industry has done, Monsanto and now Bayer, putting a tremendous amount of effort into suppressing and preventing this kind of research that you see. I've not seen any paper, quite honestly, and maybe I don't read these kind of specialized, toxicity journals or publications. What the metabolic products of glyphosate or other pesticides or insecticides, what they are, and then what they do in our human cells. From what I've seen, so this has been looked at in the context of Parkinson's disease. The Central Valley is a sort of a epidemic center for Parkinson's disease because the insecticides and the pesticides being sprayed constantly. The fact that this is still allowed is unbelievable. It's obviously the biggest supplier of vegetables and fruits in the country. And that's really the reason why this kind of research is being, suppressed. But I've seen patients myself, who grew up in the Central Valley and developed Parkinson's or all kinds of strange neurological diseases. And the only test that all these chemicals had to undergo was in the test tube of isolated cells, and it seemed safe in that because these isolated human cells do not have the machinery and the genes to break those down into other toxic compounds. But it's becoming apparent that the microbes do, and the microbes will, in that case, generate something that's not good for us.
Part of the problem, obviously, is the onus is on us because with the manufacturer, they can create the structure in which they prove safety, but the onus is on us to try to prove that it's not safe or that it's harmful.
Yeah.
It's really on the population, and so much fallout takes place. And we're talking about with Monsanto, we're getting into multi-billion-dollar entity. And if something is doing well with the bottom line is so integrated in the culture, they're not going to be willing to just stop doing the thing. Their hand has to be forced. And so, right now, as you mentioned, the data, even something like chlorpyrifos is another one, and known carcinogen, rampant issues with birth defects and miscarriages. The list goes on and on and on. And well noted to be dangerous, also agreed upon in the scientific community, but it's caught up in red tape. It was going to be pulled off the market recently, just a couple years ago, but there was some other litigation came into play, and it's just kind of caught up in red tape, and it's still out on the market doing harm, something that we know is dangerous. And this is the world that we live in, literally, because you mentioned, even our air. There are billions of tons of newly concocted chemicals, tens of thousands of different ones put into our environment every year. And a lot of this, we have the EPA. The EPA is putting out these stats, by the way. It's generally where I go. And they're sharing these statistics are you guys not checking this stuff out? How are there 40,000 new chemical complexes that are released into the environment in the last decade? How is that even possible?
Yeah, and a good example, an extreme example, the EPA obviously has done a great job in many ways, but a good example of how commercial and corporate interests hate that kind of investigation is what you saw under, the last administration that basically tried to shut down the EPA, and you would think, why would anybody in the world in this day and age do this? Well, because it's huge commercial interests that are at stake here,
Right. Big funding for our government. It's integrated as well. Yeah, you got to keep that in mind. Something that you mentioned earlier on, it might be one of the most fascinating things. And you talked about how our emotions are expressed in our gut, in a sense. And it just got me thinking about the concept of gut feelings, right? So our gut feelings are a real thing.
Yeah, the term gut feeling it's used very often. I mean, once you sort of become aware of that term, when I wrote my first book, I saw it 5 times a day, different politicians, athletes, everybody talked about their gut, based on my gut feelings. And there's sort of different way to understand that term because it's not used just for a single purpose. So gut feelings, the butterflies in your stomach on your first date, for example, that's a simple one, and that's something that happens acutely. So you're in a situation, it starts in the brain, it goes down, affects your gut contractions, it probably affects your microbes, feeds back to the brain through the vagus nerve. And everybody has experienced that. So that's a common one. Others, a lot of patients that I see, they knew that when they're angry, their stomach goes into knots. It's a negative gut feeling. The ones with the butterflies can be a good and a positive one. If you have to give a speech somewhere, some people get butterflies because of the worry. If you fall in love, it's a positive one, but it's an emotional arousal. It's a very simple one. It gets more complicated when you get into this making decisions based on your gut feelings. That's a tough one because, again, a lot of people have done that, including myself, and being stuck with nearly impossible decision processes. And, you made your lists of positive and negative sides, and you just cannot come up with a decision. It seems impossible. And then you do something. You go on a walk, or you go to the beach, or, and said, okay, now I'm just going to make this decision, and you make it spontaneously. No longer going to these lists and looking at it, but you make it spontaneously. And a lot of times it's positive. Now, there have been reports, not reports, but, I think it's even books written about this. It can also be dangerous. So if your brain is biased, for example, to be extremely anxious, you've always been anxious of things, so you're going to make that gut-based decision based on your underlying trait, anxiety, which is not always the best way to make those. So the idea that I came up with is, when you make a gut-based decision, you can make it instantly, just like a Google search. Even while you're typing, the answer is already there. And it sort of draws on this enormous body of memories that you have encoded over your lifetime, of both positive and negative ones, not just the emotional aspect also, but also the gut part of it. Was this associated with a certain gut sensation, or and your brain has the ability to access that database, that vast database, just like a Google search can. Mm-hmm. How it does that, and what systems in the brain can do this, it's not known, but it has a lot of similarities. The speed and not a non-linear process. The dilemma then is, can you recommend everybody to make gut-based decisions? I would say no. If you if you had a lot of trauma when you were young, you're not going to make the best decisions for your life now. Same thing if you have genetic predisposition to anxiety, risk genes, you probably don't make it. So I've sort of moved to this. This is actually a skill that you should learn. You should be aware of what your biases are to this decision making, and some people do it by paying attention to their dreams. I've done this for several years in the Jungian analysis. Extremely helpful that you learn what's actually goes on inside of your unconscious, and then make your decisions based on how you got to know yourself in terms of these deeper layers. So I wouldn't recommend it to everybody make a gut-based decision, but I would recommend to everybody to try to learn how do you do that, Yes. And some people are obviously masters, they make always the right business decision, even though, you look at the information right now that's available, all these business news and predictions, and people, Business Insider and the stock market and the comments, essentially it's impossible to make a linear decision. But then there's individuals who have always made the right investment decisions. That's in some ways a gut-based decision. You cannot, there was this book by, blocking on his name now, the Black Swan. This former Wall Street guy who basically came to the conclusion you cannot make these predictions. The system is so complex that you can, after a decision happened, you can interpret it and say, oh yeah, I knew this, but you didn't know it. There's a lot of people pretend they knew it, but so every time we deal with these complex systems, I think always comes out to the same conclusion. You can't use your linear, simple brain that served us for hundreds of thousands of years in a simple world. You cannot use that the same way in the complexity of today, where everything has to be understood in terms of systems and your decisions and actions and behavior based on that.
Yeah. So in essence, we do have these gut feelings, and we need to develop accurate assessment of these gut feelings and be aware of our biases and things like that. And so I want to ask you, have you ever had a gut feeling about something that you shouldn't do and you did it anyways, and then you regretted it?
Yeah, that's a good point. So I've also described a few situations in my first book, The Mind-Gut Connection, career choices, which has always been extremely difficult for me. So I didn't know that I was going to go to medical school, didn't know what specialty, didn't know if I should stay in Germany or should come to the US. And I've gotten pretty good when I look back. I always made the right decisions. So in retrospect, and not by listening to other people, not by these plus minus lists, but really listen to my gut feelings. And I remember a few situations really well. But then there have been other decisions, where in relationships, just gone through a recent decision, which I'm still not over with. Inherited the house of my parents in a beautiful area of southern Germany in the Alps. And so the rational decision, I made all these lists, got these big whiteboards all over our house with the plus and minuses, and asked a lot of people. And then at the end I thought, okay, it's obvious the renovation of this house would cost so much money, and I would have to be there. It only makes sense if I move there and live there. And so I made a decision, okay, let's sell it. And I'm still not over it. It was such a shock. So we did sell it. And the first time we went back, I fell in a deep state of depression, for weeks. We came back from this visit and said, God, it's the first time I made a really big mistake in my life. Didn't go by my gut feelings, which told me to hang on to it. And so I'm still hoping the turn of events will show me at some point. Actually, it was good. It was just interim's impression was it was not the best idea. But this was a decision not based on gut feelings for me.
Yeah.
And very painful. I mean, it's 2 years later and it's still not over that,
Yeah, we were just talking about this before the show. There's a new film out. It's called Medicating Normal, right? And those feelings that you're experiencing are normal feelings, and there is a variety of ways, of course, to process those things. And some things we really just don't ever get over. And it's being able to integrate with those things and, finding a way to move forward. Because here's the thing, too, even in these moments when, we have that gut feeling and we make the other decision, it tends to teach us something, if we're open to it, but we can try and suppress that or lie to ourselves. And I'm grateful. Thank you for sharing that, because it just, expressing that honesty about that decision. And, I always loved the concept of intuition aligning with science in a way that it's advanced pattern recognition, and that our brain, our gut is sensing and giving us feedback, and it's integrating into this feeling that we have. And it's based on our experience, our perceptions, our accumulated knowledge. And hopefully we have accumulated some knowledge to be able to have that. But then there's the element that we can't really explain, and that's what's so fascinating too, because we had on recently largely considered one of the, if not the top kind of self-defense expert, but he doesn't really teach self-defense. He's really steering, if you actually look to his education, steering people away from the place where they have to ever use self-defense, right? By using advanced pattern recognition. And he's had the ability to, survey. And of course, like he works with the big military companies, bring him in and these big events and all this stuff. And he's often brought in to teach fear management, right? And him having this huge database of people who've experienced violent crimes or violent offenses, he said every one of them, we'll just say, maybe 2,000 people, every person without fail has said that they had a bad feeling before whatever took place. It's just like, how do we know, like, whether it's something good or something not good? There's this kind of hidden element still in science. And even it's the big question too, with consciousness, like there's so much. And I don't know if we talked about this before the show, but I know we mentioned this, like there's so much that we don't know. And you're one of those people who've been on the cutting edge because of your choice early on to study the microbiome, to study the gut, decades before it became in vogue. And now you're sitting in this place of prominence and experience and insight that you're just able to literally funnel this into other people. But we were talking about, again, just how much we still have to discover. And I think it's a dangerous place when we get with science into a place where we think we've got it figured out.
Yeah, I mean, just briefly coming back, that personal example that I told you. So there clearly was a vast database of experience. I've grown up in this house. I've lived there even when I was going to university. For 27 years, I was totally immersed emotionally with my parents and my brother and sister. Beautiful environment. All these emotional experiences, we talked about this earlier, didn't just happen in my brain. I mean, they were always associated with the gut and probably the microbes, without my knowledge. I had no idea at the time.
You actually talk about this in your book, about that early life experiences creating that kind of gut-brain dialogue.
Yeah. And so that I made a brain-only based decision overriding all this vast body of information. It was, when you think about it, it's kind of crazy, really. And some people can do this, like if you're only interested in finances or, making money, then you can override this. There's definitely individuals who don't listen to that part of their, they just operate like a computer. Our brain is a good prediction machine, for... But the reason that it's affecting me so much is because that vast database is still active, and the emotional effect this has on my mood and had on my, level of depression at the time when I came back indicates how powerful that is. That all this information came back up, and now I have to process it, after the fact. Yeah, and so in terms of science, I think good examples what's happening right now in brain science and neuroscience is this whole unexpected resurgence of psychedelics. Something that we have suppressed, for 50 years. Politicians have suppressed, even though scientists knew better, 50 years ago. And now it's coming back, and we don't really know where it's going to lead us. It certainly opens up parts of the brain that have not been part of our psychiatry or neurology or our disease models. And I think it will happen fairly fast because science is beginning to embrace it. Funding agencies, even the NIH, there's a lot of investors, pouring money into this. So this will fundamentally change, I think, we look at our brains and how we think about the world. And, so, yeah, and with the microbiome, I think there's still lots of things that we have to learn. I always say we're probably around 10% of our knowledge to understand the whole system. We know a lot of details, technical details, molecular details, but we don't even know how to go from findings in a mouse, and the mouse results are all very impressive and revolutionary. We don't even know how to go from there to see, does this happen in humans? We don't know that, you know. So I think we're a very early stage of it, and I think there are certain things that have helped even at this early stage, that we have a very good rationale now of, you know, why a healthy diet is important and what kind of diet. You know, it's almost like answered that question. I would say a diet that's good for your microbes is good for your body as well. You know, there's no question about that. And so that eliminates, like, you know, a lot of these fat diets. And
that was actually going to be my next question, which is, what are some of the things that we can do proactively? Because you talked about, for example, in your book about early life exposures really helping to kind of set the blueprint for our gut. But this is also extended out throughout our lifetime. What are some of the things for us to proactively expose ourselves to? What are some good exposures for developing healthier microbiome, a healthier gut, and even our gut feelings? What are some of the things that we should get ourselves around and expose ourselves to?
If we stick with the diet part first, it's not the only one, but it's an important one. Yeah, that really starts even prenatally. The nutrition of the pregnant mother is a very important point, because the health of the mother's microbiome has an influence on the state of this low-grade inflammation, which is an influence on the developing fetus and the developing baby. So the brain of the newborn infant is already influenced by what diet the mother was on, and what lifestyle, what good things the mother did for the gut health and microbial health. Then the first 3 years of life, for this shaping of the baby's microbiome, and the interaction with the immune system, this teaching of the immune system what's good and bad, which bacteria are good, which are bad. If we don't want to interfere with that process, or interfere as little as possible with it, so prenatally, postnatally, but then it goes on in the adult. So now we're stuck with a system that's been partially programmed from the mother's side, and the mother's gut health, by the infant's gut health, but it's not completely stuck in that mode. So early on, people said, so what can I do if I had a bad, if I was exposed to antibiotics and an unhealthy diet and was not breastfed, am I doomed? Is my health and my gut health doomed for the rest of my life? So initially people thought, this is a pretty bad outlook, but that's not the case. As I mentioned earlier, we can change the gut microbiome in 48 hours by switching the diet. Within a certain bandwidth, we can't bring it back to something, that hunter-gatherers in Africa or
bringing back certain species.
Yeah, we can't bring it back. There may be species that are at extremely low, almost non-detectable levels, that could be nurtured back, and so what we can do to help this process is to go to a diet. And I always said, it's tailored to the microbes, things that are not absorbed rapidly in our small intestine. Most of our nutrition, modern nutrition, is all focused on, let's get let's get the carbs in, and let's get the protein in, and let's get the healthy fats in. It's all absorbed small intestine. Nobody talked about, well, why not let's talk about all the food that goes down to the microbes, and the microbes produce these metabolites that, like the short chain fatty acids, that are healthy for us. Yeah. So I think as an adult, main guideline I would say in terms of diet is focus on the foods that we know today, based on the science we know today, are optimal for a healthy ecosystem of our microbes. So these are all the big molecules, the fiber molecules, the polyphenol molecules, both of which of these categories come from plant-based food. But also add the omega-3 into it, and a few other things. But the main components of this largely plant-based diet are the components that our microbes are specialized in and can produce hundreds, thousands of metabolites. Many of them we don't know what they do. But the ones that we have a lot of information, short chain fatty acids, sort of like the aspirin of the body, or the microbial world, that we have a system inside of us that produces anti-inflammatory substances that act in the gut, in the body, in the liver, in the heart, and in the brain. If we nurture that, so we have the optimal level of this, and we decrease the components that have a pro-inflammatory effect, like things in certain food items, then it's fairly easy. We almost know the answer today, based on the diet. But the diet is not the only part. So the microbial ecosystem is also exposed, as we talked about earlier, to these influences from the brain. Your emotions, your positive emotions, your negative emotions. This system only functions optimally if it's not constantly disturbed, perturbed by negative emotions. And stress and anxiety and fear, interestingly, have the same negative effect on the health of the gut microbiome as an unhealthy diet has. So now you combine those two, which is not atypical in our society.
Right.
And we've talked about this in the past as well, that certain socioeconomic segments of our society are particularly affected by this combination, the stress, the negative emotions, and the unhealthy diet. You have the perfect storm for an unhealthy environment. So big recommendation, deal with the diet, which is not easy, the cost of it, the availability, and then, with teaching mindfulness, making people aware, online programs for mindfulness and emotional hygiene, I would say. So those are the main things that people can do. Now, there's one thing. I've never been a big proponent of supplements, particularly of individual supplements, which I just think it's a nice placebo. But there are what big studies have shown. If people are on a healthy diet that is rich in these polyphenols, so a plant-based diet, then the benefit from an additional supplement, it was shown in the study of 20,000 people, is not that great. But if you don't have that healthy diet, then you have a significant benefit on cardiovascular health and mortality. And so one idea is that maybe it's easier to provide people that don't have access to these diets, and have the stressful life that they're dealing with. That's the indication, that's the population you might want to promote selective evidence-based supplements, because they don't have it themselves, and it could make a huge influence on longevity and mortality. And so I would say those two things, the influences from the brain and the influences through our diet are the two things. Ideally, you want to combine those if you want to have a healthy lifestyle. For your gut ecosystem, I think you need to do both of these things. And if you are at a very high risk, possibly also genetically, you may want to look at these other modalities, that are becoming available. both the supplements, but also, some online programs. There's more and more these cognitive behavioral, the mindfulness, the happiness, like that Yale course, that the most successful course ever created about teaching happiness. That's a good example. So you can actually teach people, from students to the regular population, to create a positive mind state, which will then have this positive effect on your gut health as well. I bet you if they've done a study on not just the happiness level of people that have completed this course, but also on their gut symptoms, I'm not sure if that was done. I doubt it was done. They would have seen a significant effect on that.
Yeah, you already know. You already know.
Yeah, I sort of know the answer.
These things literally feed into each other as well. So having healthier emotions, if we get good social networks, social connections, and we see the integration with food in those circumstances, we tend to make better food choices when we're eating together with family members, for example. And there's studies out of Harvard. There's studies done on, children and adolescents. The benefits are there in the data as well. But what happens when we have those healthy social connections and good food? Like, we're starting to stack conditions, as you talked about earlier, with the network, that overall systems network. So now this also, the final thing I want to ask you about is kind of getting back into a piece of our conversation, which is there's still so much for us to know, and how certain prevailing paradigms or just kind of standard of care can take hold even when the data changes. And there's a recent study published in the New England Journal of Medicine on colonoscopies. Let's talk about that.
Yeah. I mean, there were two studies. You sent me one about the antidepressants, the serotonin reuptake inhibitors, and I, told you about this colonoscopy study. So two examples almost at the same time. They've come out that shows you that limitation of just relying on, totally relying and thinking that it's the gold standard now. So with done a study on 80,000 in Scandinavia, on 80,000 people in Northern Europe, with screening colonoscopies. And there's a lot of reasons you could criticize that study, because only a fraction of the people that were contacted showed up for the colonoscopy. But if you base the results on the intention to treat, they found, yes, there's a small benefit of the colonoscopy screening, certainly not as big as is being promoted in the US. And my colleagues at UCLA have built a career on this promotion. And so that has shown that the effect size is actually quite small. That people that didn't develop colon cancer, or that had surgery, or that died from colon cancer, was not that greatly affected.
Although this is a very cost-intensive procedure.
Very cost-effective procedure, and its popularity, I hate to say this as a gastroenterologist, hoping none of my colleagues at UCLA listens, its popularity was clearly driven by professional societies, because it's a huge income bonus for gastroenterologists. That feeds whole careers and practices, and screening colonoscopies, and then lowering the age now recently to 45.
Right. Yeah.
And I bet you will be lowered even further, because
absolutely. Yeah.
There's so in Europe, the main screening technique are these DNA tests, these stool tests, which have been improved tremendously. And I think there's going to be, obviously, it's got to be some middle ground, some compromise. If you have high risk factors, family risk of colon cancer, if your stool test is positive, you should have a colonoscopy. But the screening colonoscopy for everybody, regardless of risk factors, I personally never really believed in that concept, particularly when you hear that almost none of these patients or the programs they go to makes any dietary assessment or recommendation, which is one of the main causes for colon cancer.
Yeah, exactly.
And the decreasing age of prevalence to 45 now is because of the diet. It's not some miraculous thing that's happening. So that's something I think you have to be careful with these. This is a good example, the combination of massive commercial interests with scientific concepts, but leaving out a big portion like the diet side, Another example is with antidepressants. This big study, this meta-analysis of showing that the effectiveness of serotonin system targeted drugs for depression has been exaggerated. I still think there's a lot to be learned of serotonin and serotonin receptor modulation. 90% is in the gut. It's not even in the brain, where all these psychiatric medications are targeted at. But I think this and antidepressants have saved many lives. Serotonin reuptake inhibitors.
But they've also destroyed some lives too.
Yeah, it has destroyed some lives, and hopefully we're not getting into the same mistake with the psychedelic enhanced psychotherapy for depression, because that could lead to a similar kind of situation that 10 years later we realize, wow, this is it was totally exaggerated, and because a lot of people develop depression because it's an appropriate reaction of the brain to the situations that they're in, and it's obviously easier to give a pill than to offer somebody cognitive behavioral therapy. And,
to help them process.
Yeah. But it's interesting that it's a coincidence that two papers have kind of addressed two very common, prevalent practices in medicine that were supposedly based on a lot of science. I mean, a lot of papers have come out of this,
Yeah, and you mentioned also when you sent it over to me that, again, less costly things like stool samples that are even becoming more efficient as well can be just as informative as this very costly kind of, again, standard of care procedure with a colonoscopy. And then there are cases where that methodology is absolutely appropriate.
Absolutely.
But, the current structure of things, again, it's kind of even with statins, like it keeps lowering down the cholesterol level to where you should be on a statin. And now we're moving back the timeline when you need to go in for colonoscopy. And, again, I can foresee it being 40 very soon here, just keep it moving the goalposts so we're using this methodology to find a problem and then not actually removing the cause if there is a problem.
Yeah.
That is the problem.
That's a problem.
And so again, I just appreciate your insight, your experience. You create these wonderful resources for us as well with your two best-selling books, Mind-Gut Connection, and also the more recent one looking at the immune system. Oh my goodness. Can you let people know where they can pick up your books and also just get more information?
Yeah, so it's the Mind-Gut Connection, which is still after 6, almost 7 years, hovers around the Amazon bestseller list, which really amazes me how that's possible. And the second one, the Gut Immune Connection, which is in some ways a sequel and an update. It still has a lot about the mind and the brain, but then it identifies the immune system as its main transduction mechanism of these influences that are negative influences created by our diet and by these brain influences, how that then causes disease. And that's where the immune system comes in. And people are now more fascinated, which I find interesting, with the mind and the brain than with the immune system at the moment. It sort of comes, it comes in waves. I mean, when the Mind-Gut Connection first came out, it wasn't that popular the first year, and sort of create a whole wave of interest and enthusiasm and spread to all kinds of levels of media and online programs. So people can go on Amazon. Mind-Gut Connection is out on paperback. The Gut Immune Connection, we're working on the paperback edition. which will be updated, and so it's going to be more appropriate for readers today.
Awesome. We'll stay tuned for that, of course. We'll put the show notes link to all the books and also your website as well. And, again, I truly appreciate your insight, especially at a time like this. Like, you tend to be ahead of the curve because, and for good reason, you've been in this field for what, 40, you're getting close to 40 years.
Yeah.
This is, really remarkable. We're talking about what's coming up with the microbiome, and even this insight that you shared, with the colonoscopies. Like, this was something that was still prior to the data coming out. Like, you're just like, something is not matching up here, and so I just really appreciate that. I appreciate your voice, and I can't wait to have you back on again to talk about more. It's always fascinating.
Yeah, no, this is fascinating, and and thanks for the comment about this being ahead of the curve. It's a curse and a benefit. The curse is you come out with these things and nobody believes it, and nobody's interested in it.
Yeah.
So you have to wait 10 years before, before things. So give you another example. Like 20 years ago, we started a holistic, comprehensive, multidisciplinary wellness program at UCLA in the Division of Digestive Diseases. And, we had acupuncturists and psychologists and dietitians, and it was very successful, very popular for the patients. But the institution pulled the plug on it, because this is not, it's not gastroenterology. And so now, 25, 30 years later, our division chief, who's, younger person, created a very similar program, almost using the blueprint. But if you imagine, how you feel. So you did this 30 years ago, the leadership of your institution pulled the plug and dismissed it as useless. And then you see it 10 years later and, 30 years later, coming back in full speed. So what it is inside of me that does that, I've often wondered about this. Why does my, as a concluding comment, so why does my brain do that? Make these assessments, predictions, come up with models that are not matching with the current state of knowledge or the current state of acceptance. Maybe it does have to do with the gut, the mind-gut connection, that there's something in my gut that interacts with the brain and computes information in a way that other people are not doing it the same way, which goes again with this intuition and knowing things at a gut level rather than just pure at a cognitive level. So maybe.
Yeah, it's so poetic that this is the case, and there's always people who go ahead and, pave the way for us. So, just know that you're appreciated. Hey, if you like this video, make sure to check out this video right here.
The power that exists within the gut is insane. And this is why it becomes so important for us to, first of all, learn about it and use that information that we learn to empower ourselves.